Imagine a language so adaptable that it absorbed a French invasion, survived the printing press, conquered an empire, and now dominates the internet. A language that started with maybe 50,000 speakers on a rainy island and now has 1.5 billion users worldwide. English has more words than almost any other language, over 170,000 in current use. It's the language of international business, aviation, science, and diplomacy. Shakespeare wrote in it. The internet runs on it. 3/4 of all emails are written in it. But here's what's truly shocking. If you could time travel back 1,000 years and land in England, you couldn't understand a word anyone said. The language would be as foreign to you as German or Dutch. Because Old English and Modern English are so different, they're essentially separate languages. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a Germanic tribal dialect became the world's lingua franca. You'll discover why English spelling is so insane. It's not random, there are specific historical reasons. And you'll learn about the moment when English almost died completely, replaced by French forever. But here's the secret, hiding in plain sight. English isn't really one language. It's 3 languages wearing a trench coat: Germanic structure, French vocabulary, and Latin sophistication, all pretending to be one coherent system. Let's start at the very beginning. Before there was an England, before there was English, with the people who would bring the language to Britain. In 400 CE, there is no English language. Britain is a Roman province called Britannia and has been for nearly 4 centuries. The native people are Celts, speaking Celtic languages related to modern Welsh, Irish, and Scottish Gaelic. They've been Romanized. Latin is the language of administration, law, and high culture. Celtic languages are for everyday life. Britain is peaceful, prosperous, and protected by Roman legions. Cities have forums, baths, and paved streets. Hadrian's Wall keeps northern tribes out. Trade flows across the empire. Then, in 410 CE, Rome abandons Britain. The legions leave to defend the crumbling empire elsewhere. Britain is suddenly defenseless, isolated, and vulnerable. The Romano-British try to maintain civilization. But without the Roman military and administrative structure, things fall apart. Cities decline. Trade collapses. Literacy drops. The infrastructure crumbles. And then, around 450 CE, the invaders arrive. They come from what's now northern Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. 3 main groups: the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They're Germanic tribes, farmers, warriors, seafarers. They speak related Germanic dialects, part of the same language family as German, Dutch, and the Scandinavian languages. Why did they come? Population pressure back home. News that Britain was rich and undefended. Land hunger. The same reasons people have always migrated. The Anglo-Saxon invasion wasn't a single event. It was waves of migration over decades, sometimes peaceful settlement, sometimes violent conquest. The Romano-British Celts fought back, retreated west into Wales and Cornwall, or were absorbed into the new Anglo-Saxon culture. By 600 CE, most of what we now call England, literally Angleland, is controlled by Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. And they speak their Germanic dialects. This is the birth of English, not yet called that. But these Germanic dialects are the foundation of what will become English. Old English, roughly 450–1100 CE, is a fully Germanic language. If you've studied German, you'd recognize the structure. It has grammatical gender, masculine, feminine, neuter for all nouns. Complex case systems, nominative, accusative, genitive, dative. Strong and weak verb conjugations. Word order that's more flexible than modern English. The vocabulary is almost entirely Germanic. Words for basic things: house, wife, child, bread, water, sun, moon, all Germanic. Most of the everyday vocabulary comes from the Anglo-Saxons. Let me give you an example of Old English. Here's the Lord's Prayer in Old English. Fader ure thu de ert on heophonum. Sith in nama gehalgod. You can sort of see it if you try. Father our, thou that art in heavens, be thy name hallowed. But it's clearly not modern English. The spelling is different, the grammar is different, many words are unrecognizable. Old English poetry is rich and sophisticated. Beowulf is the most famous, an epic poem about a hero fighting monsters. It's complex, alliterative, and beautiful. Old English wasn't a primitive language, it was just different from what came later. Anglo-Saxon England was divided into kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Sussex, Wessex, and Kent. These kingdoms fought each other, formed alliances, competed for dominance. Each kingdom had its own dialect of Old English: Northumbrian in the north, Mercian in the Midlands, West Saxon in the south, Kentish in the southeast. These dialects were mutually intelligible but distinct. Regional variation existed from the beginning. There was no standard English, no dictionaries, no grammar books, no official version. Language was oral, local, and fluid, but literacy existed. The Anglo-Saxons used runes initially, then adopted the Latin alphabet after Christian missionaries arrived. Monasteries became centers of learning where manuscripts were copied and preserved. Starting in 793 CE, Scandinavian raiders, Vikings, began attacking Britain. First hit-and-run raids, then invasions, then settlement. By the mid-800s, Vikings controlled much of northern and eastern England, an area called the Danelaw. The Vikings spoke Old Norse, another Germanic language, related to but different from Old English. The two languages were similar enough that Anglo-Saxons and Vikings could communicate with effort. And when two related languages meet, and people need to communicate, something interesting happens. They simplify. The complex case endings start to drop. The grammatical gender system begins to erode. Word order becomes more fixed. The languages influence each other, taking vocabulary and grammar from both. This Viking influence is huge. We got words like sky, egg, window, husband, knife, take, get, give, want, they, them, their. Even the S plural ending, books, cats, dogs, might come from Scandinavian influence. The Vikings didn't just raid and pillage, they settled, farmed, intermarried, and mixed their language with Old English. This mixing simplified English and made it more flexible. In 871, Alfred became King of Wessex, the only Anglo-Saxon kingdom that successfully resisted Viking conquest. Alfred was remarkable. He fought the Vikings, established peace, and promoted learning. He personally translated Latin texts into English. He established schools and encouraged literacy. Under Alfred, West Saxon became the prestige dialect. This is important because the manuscripts that survived were mostly written in West Saxon, so that's the version of Old English we know best. Alfred wanted English to be a language of learning, not just Latin. He believed ordinary people should be able to read in their own language. This was revolutionary. Most of medieval Europe used Latin exclusively for anything important. Alfred insisted English was worthy. By 1000 CE, England was politically unified, mostly under English kings. Old English was the language of the land. There were regional dialects, but the language was thriving. And then came 1066. On October 14th, 1066, William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. This wasn't just a change of rulers. This was a complete replacement of the English ruling class. William and his followers were Norman French. They spoke Norman French, a dialect of Old French. They imported thousands of French-speaking nobles, clergy, and administrators. Suddenly, English kings spoke French. The royal court spoke French. The nobility spoke French. The church hierarchy spoke French. The law courts used French and Latin. English became the language of the conquered. Peasants, farmers, the lower classes. For nearly 300 years, the language of power and prestige in England was French. English survived among the common people, but it had no official status, no literary prestige, no connection to power. This should have killed English. In most conquest situations, the conquered language disappears within a few generations, but something different happened in England. Post-conquest England was trilingual. Latin, the language of the church, scholarship, and international communication. All educated people learned Latin. Church services were in Latin. Legal documents were in Latin. French, the language of the court, nobility, law, and high culture. If you wanted power or prestige, you spoke French. English, the language of the common people, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, the vast majority of the population. This situation lasted for generations. The Norman nobility married each other, maintained connections with France, and saw themselves as French. But here's the key: they lived in England. They owned English land. They ruled English people. And slowly, over generations, they became English. During these centuries of French dominance, something remarkable happened. English absorbed massive amounts of French vocabulary. The French speakers and English speakers had to communicate. Trade, law, administration, everyday interaction, they needed to talk to each other. English speakers learned French words. French speakers learned English words. And gradually, thousands of French words entered English. We can still see the pattern. English often has two words for the same concept. One Germanic, one French. Ask, Germanic. Question, French. Begin, Germanic. Commence, French. Help, Germanic. Aid, French. Think, Germanic. Consider, French. Often the Germanic word is simpler and more common. The French word is more formal or sophisticated. Look at animals and meat. Cow, Germanic. Beef, French. Bœuf, pig, Germanic. Pork, French. Pork, sheep, Germanic. Mutton, French. Mouton. Why? Because English-speaking peasants raised the animals, but French-speaking nobles ate the meat at fancy dinners. By 1300, English had absorbed thousands of French words relating to government, parliament, council, court, nation, law, judge, jury, justice, crime, military, army, battle, soldier, enemy, food, dinner, supper, sauce, beef, pork, fashion, to dress, robe, garment, button, art, beauty, color, image, paint, and abstract concepts, reason, virtue, liberty, justice. In 1204, King John lost Normandy to France. English kings no longer held significant French territory. This was a turning point. The English nobility gradually became less connected to France and more identified with England. Then came the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, a series of conflicts between England and France. During this period, French became the language of the enemy. Suddenly, speaking French in England was less prestigious and possibly unpatriotic. Meanwhile, English had never died among the common people, and the common people were the majority. In 1362, Parliament was opened in English for the first time. English became the language of law courts. English began replacing French in official functions. By 1400, even the nobility spoke English as their primary language. English had survived, but it was a different English than before 1066. Middle English, roughly 1100–1500, is a hybrid. It maintains the Germanic grammatical structure, but has absorbed huge French and Latin vocabulary. Grammatical changes had continued. The case system simplified further. Grammatical gender disappeared. Word order became more fixed. Subject, verb, object became standard. But the vocabulary explosion was enormous. English went from maybe 50,000 words to over 100,000 words by incorporating French and Latin. Let me show you Middle English. Here's Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written around 1387. One that April, with his showers suit, the drought of March hath pursed to the root. When April with his showers sweet, the drought of March has pierced to the root. You can understand this. It's clearly English, even if the spelling is odd, and some words are different. Middle English feels like English in a way Old English doesn't. That's because it's the transitional form between Old English and Modern English. Middle English had significant regional variation. Northern dialects, Midland dialects, Southern dialects, they were different enough that someone from Yorkshire might struggle to understand someone from Kent. There was still no standard English, no dictionaries, no grammar authorities, no official version. Everyone wrote phonetically, spelling words as they sounded in their dialect. This lack of standardization created wild spelling variation. The same word might be spelled 5 different ways in the same document. Chaucer wrote in the London dialect, East Midlands, which would become the basis for Standard English, but that wasn't inevitable at the time. Geoffrey Chaucer, 1343–1400, was crucial to English's prestige. He was educated, worldly, connected to the royal court. He could have written in French or Latin, the languages of serious literature, but he chose to write in English. The Canterbury Tales is brilliant, funny, sophisticated, psychologically complex. It proved English could be a literary language, not just a vernacular. Chaucer expanded English vocabulary by freely borrowing from French, Latin, and Italian. He created new words, adapted foreign words, experimented with the language. His success inspired others. By 1400, English literature was thriving. English was becoming respectable again. In 1476, William Caxton set up the first printing press in England. This might not sound dramatic, but it changed everything. Before printing, books were copied by hand. Scribes would spell words however seemed right to them. There was no pressure for consistency. But printing created standardization. When you print thousands of copies of a book, you need to decide on one spelling for each word. Caxton had to choose which dialect of English, which spellings, which grammatical forms. He mostly chose the London dialect, where he was printing, and the spellings that seemed most common or reasonable to him. Whatever Caxton printed became standard because it was replicated thousands of times. Other printers followed his conventions. Gradually, printed English became standardized. This is why English spelling is so weird. Caxton standardized spellings in the late 1400s, freezing them in print. But then pronunciation changed. Between roughly 1400 and 1700, English underwent the Great Vowel Shift, a systematic change in how long vowels were pronounced. This is complicated linguistically, but here's the basic idea. Long vowels moved up in the mouth. Vowels already at the top became diphthongs, two-part vowels. For example, sweet was pronounced like sat, more like sate. Bite was pronounced like beat. Boot was pronounced like boat. House was pronounced like whose. This is why English spelling seems crazy. The spellings reflect medieval pronunciation, but we pronounce vowels differently now. Night was actually pronounced with a K and a guttural CH sound, like German nicht. Now we say night, but keep the medieval spelling. Det and doubt were spelled det and doute from French. Scholars added the B to show the Latin origins, debitum, dubitare, even though nobody pronounced the B. English spelling is a historical record of how the language used to sound, preserved in amber by the printing press. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in classical learning. Scholars were rediscovering Greek and Roman texts, translating them, studying them obsessively. And English absorbed thousands more words from Latin and Greek, not through natural language contact this time, but through conscious borrowing. Educated people would take Latin or Greek words and anglicize them. Words like education, logic, mathematics, encyclopedia, pneumonia, skeleton, atmosphere, catastrophe, democracy, academy, diploma, theory, physics, all borrowed during the Renaissance. This created another layer of vocabulary. Germanic, core, everyday words, eat, sleep, house, work. French, refined formal words, dine, repose, mansion, labor. Latin Greek, technical, scholarly words, consume, rest, domicile, occupation. English became extraordinarily rich in synonyms, each with different connotations and registers. In 1611, the King James Bible was published, an English translation authorized by King James III. This was monumentally important. For centuries, the Bible had been in Latin. Ordinary people couldn't read it themselves. They depended on priests to interpret. Protestant reformers wanted people to read the Bible in their own language. William Tyndale had created an English translation in the 1520s and was executed for it. But the King James Version became the standard. The KJV was written in deliberately dignified, slightly archaic English. It used thee and thou, which were already becoming old-fashioned, to create a sense of timeless authority. Phrases from the KJV entered everyday English. The writing on the wall, a drop in the bucket, the apple of his eye, by the skin of my teeth, go the extra mile. For centuries, the KJV was the book most English speakers knew best. It shaped the language, established rhythms and phrases, and gave English a shared literary reference. William Shakespeare, 1564–1616, did for English what Chaucer had done 200 years earlier, proved its literary brilliance, but on an even grander scale. Shakespeare's vocabulary was enormous. He used about 30,000 different words in his works. The average modern English speaker uses about 20,000. He freely invented words when he needed them. Estimates suggest Shakespeare coined or first recorded 1,700 plus words. assassination, addiction, eyeball, fashionable, generous, gloomy, lonely, majestic, obscene, zany. Many of these were existing words he adapted, adding prefixes or suffixes. Others he created from scratch. Some were just first recorded in his works. He might not have invented them, but he made them famous. He also created hundreds of phrases still in use: break the ice, heart of gold, wild goose chase, in a pickle, wear my heart on my sleeve. Shakespeare showed that English could express anything: high tragedy, bawdy comedy, complex psychology, philosophical depth. It could be beautiful, powerful, flexible, and precise. After Shakespeare, nobody doubted English was a great literary language. By 1600, English had become early modern English, essentially the same language we speak now, just with some archaic vocabulary and grammar. If you read Shakespeare or the King James Bible, you can understand most of it. The grammar is mostly familiar, though they still used thou, thee, which has since disappeared. The vocabulary is mostly recognizable. The pronunciation was different, closer to Irish or rural American accents than modern British RP, but the language structure was basically set. English had grammar similar to modern English: simple case system, fixed word order, no grammatical gender, straightforward verb conjugations. But vocabulary kept expanding, spelling gradually standardized, and the language continued evolving toward the form we know. In the 1600s and 1700s, Britain began building a global empire. English speakers colonized North America, the Caribbean, parts of Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand. Wherever the British went, English went. But something interesting happened. English in each location began diverging. American English, Canadian English, Australian English, Indian English, South African English. They all developed their own characteristics: vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. English was no longer confined to Britain. It was becoming a family of related varieties, like the Romance languages descended from Latin. English colonists arrived in North America starting in 1607. They brought 17th-century British English with them. But then American and British English evolved separately for 400 years. American English preserved some features that British English later lost. The R sound after vowels, car, far, here. Many British dialects dropped this fall for autumn. Originally British, now considered American. Gotten as past participle of get. British now uses got. American English also developed its own vocabulary. New words for new things: moose, raccoon, chipmunk, from Native American languages. Different words for the same things: truck, lorry, elevator, lift, apartment flat, faucet tap. Noah Webster published his American Dictionary in 1828, deliberately promoting American spellings: color, not color; center, not center; theater, not theater; check, not check. Webster wanted American English to be distinct from British English, a declaration of linguistic independence to match political independence. By 1900, American and British English were clearly different varieties, though mutually intelligible. In 1755, Samuel Johnson published A Dictionary of the English Language, the first comprehensive English dictionary. Johnson didn't just define words. He included quotations showing how great writers use them, explained etymology, and set standards for correct English. The dictionary was enormously influential. It established which words were real English and which were not. It standardized spellings. It created the idea that there was a correct form of English. Before Johnson, people wrote and spoke however seemed right. After Johnson, there was an authority to consult. This began the process of English becoming more rigid, more standardized, more proper, which had both benefits: clarity, shared standards, and costs, prescriptivism, stigmatizing variation. The Industrial Revolution, 1760–1840, created thousands of new technologies, processes, and concepts that needed names. English absorbed or created massive technical vocabulary: engine, piston, valve, turbine, locomotive, railway, factory, industry, manufacturing, chemistry, electricity. Telegraph English was becoming the language of science and technology. Scientific papers were increasingly written in English. Technical manuals were in English. This trend accelerated through the 19th and 20th centuries. By the late 1900s, English was the dominant language of international science, technology, and medicine. In each British colony, English developed unique characteristics from contact with local languages and unique local conditions. Indian English borrowed words from Hindi, Urdu, and other Indian languages. Bungalow, pajamas, juggernaut, jungle. Developed distinctive grammatical patterns like using present continuous more broadly, I am knowing rather than I know. Australian English developed unique slang and pronunciation. Borrowed some words from Aboriginal languages. Kangaroo, boomerang, has distinctive vowel sounds. South African English, influenced by Afrikaans and African languages, contains unique vocabulary and grammatical patterns. Irish English has distinctive pronunciation and grammar influenced by Irish Gaelic. I do be working as a habitual present, for example. These weren't wrong versions of English. They were legitimate varieties, adapted to their local contexts with their own internal consistency. But they created a question: which English is correct? In Britain, received pronunciation, RP, sometimes called BBC English or the Queen's English, became the prestige accent in the 19th and 20th centuries. RP is the accent of the British upper class, spoken by maybe 3% of British people. It's the accent used by BBC newsreaders in formal education by the royal family. RP became associated with education, intelligence, and authority. Other accents, working class, regional or non-British, were stigmatized as less correct, less intelligent, less proper. This created linguistic hierarchy and discrimination. People with wrong accents faced prejudice in employment, education, and social situations. Similar dynamics occurred elsewhere. In America, General American became the neutral standard. In each English-speaking country, one variety became standard, while others were marginalized. But linguistically, there's no such thing as a correct accent. All varieties of English are equally valid systems. The social hierarchies are about power, not language. After World War II, America emerged as a global superpower. American economic, military, and cultural influence spread worldwide, and with it, English. American movies, music, television, and products spread globally. If you wanted to do international business, you needed English. If you wanted to study science or technology, you needed English. If you wanted to participate in global culture, you needed English. English became the lingua franca, the common language for international communication. By 2000, English had more second language speakers than native speakers. It had become the world's language. The internet was invented by English speakers. Early internet infrastructure, protocols, and culture were English language. Programming languages use English keywords. Domain names use the Latin alphabet. Early internet content was overwhelmingly in English. Even today, over 50% of web content is in English, despite English speakers being maybe 20% of internet users. The internet also accelerated English change. New words emerge online and spread globally within days. Google, verb, tweet, selfie, unfriend, photobomb, clickbait, viral, meme, troll. Internet English has its own conventions, all caps for shouting acronyms, LOL, BRB, IMHO, FOMO, emoji and emoticons, informal spelling and grammar. Young people worldwide are learning English partially through internet exposure. This creates a more uniform global English, but also introduces new varieties and changes. English is no longer one language with correct and incorrect variants. It's a family of related languages or varieties, collectively called World Englishes. There's British English, American English, Australian English, Canadian English, Indian English, Nigerian English, Singaporean English, Philippine English, and dozens more. Each has its own phonology, sound system, lexicon, vocabulary, grammar, and pragmatics, usage conventions. Linguists now describe three circles of English. Inner circle, countries where English is the native language: UK, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland. Outer circle, countries with colonial history where English is an official or major language: India, Nigeria, Philippines, Singapore, South Africa. Expanding circle, countries where English is learned as a foreign language but has no official status: China, Japan, Russia, most of Europe, Latin America. All varieties are linguistically equal. None is more correct than others. When non-native speakers communicate in English, they often use a simplified version with basic vocabulary, simple grammar, and avoidance of idioms and cultural references. This is sometimes called globish, a kind of international English optimized for clarity rather than sophistication. Globish tends to use simple words over complex synonyms, avoid phrasal verbs, which are idiomatically unpredictable, use straightforward grammar, minimize idioms and cultural allusions, and speak more slowly and clearly. Interestingly, Globish conversations are often easier between two non-native speakers than between native and non-native speakers. Native speakers use idioms, speak quickly, and assume cultural knowledge that non-natives lack. English is changing faster than ever. New words enter the language constantly. Technology, smartphone, app, emoji, cryptocurrency, AI, algorithm, streaming, podcast, social cultural, cancel culture, woke, ghosting, stan, bay, lit, basic, Karen blends, Brexit, staycation, infotainment, glamping, brunch verbs from brands, Google it, Zoom meeting, Netflix and chill, Uber home. Some changes are grammatical. They as singular pronoun, now standard. Literally as intensifier, even when not literal, I was like, replacing I said in quotations. Progressive forms spreading, I'm loving it. Older speakers often complain that the language is deteriorating. But it's not deteriorating. It's evolving, as it always has. Every generation introduces changes that older generations dislike, but most of those changes stick and become normal. There's ongoing tension between prescriptivists and descriptivists. Prescriptivists believe language has correct and incorrect forms. Advocate rules. fight against changes they see as degrading the language. Say things like, don't split infinitives, or never end sentences with prepositions. Descriptivists describe how people actually use language without judging. Accept that language changes constantly. Focus on what is rather than what should be. Most modern linguists are descriptivists. They recognize that all living languages change and that attempts to freeze language fail. But prescriptivism persists, especially in education and formal writing, where standards matter for clarity and shared conventions. The truth is, context matters. There are situations where formal standard English is appropriate. Job interviews, academic papers, professional communication, and situations where informal, non-standard English is perfectly fine. Texting friends, casual conversation, creative writing. English will continue evolving. Some likely trends: more global diversity. As more varieties emerge and solidify, English will increasingly mean many related but distinct languages. Simplified grammar. International use tends to simplify complex features. Irregular verbs might regularize. Unusual grammar might standardize. Vocabulary explosion. English will keep absorbing words from every language it contacts. The vocabulary will continue growing. Technology integration. As AI translation improves, the pressure to learn English might decrease. But for now, English remains essential for global communication. Digital influence. Internet English, emoji, and new communication forms will continue shaping the language in unpredictable ways. Will English remain dominant? Probably for decades, due to momentum and network effects. Once a language becomes the global standard, it's self-reinforcing. People learn it because others speak it. But languages rise and fall with civilizations. Latin dominated Europe for centuries, then fragmented. English could eventually fragment into mutually unintelligible varieties, or decline if another language, Chinese, Spanish, something else, overtakes it economically or culturally. We've traveled 1,600 years, from Germanic tribes arriving in Britain to English as the global language of the Internet. From Old English that modern speakers can't understand to World Englishes spoken by 1.5 billion people. English has survived Viking invasions, Norman conquest, spelling chaos, massive vocabulary expansion, global spread, and constant change. What makes English special isn't that it's inherently better than other languages. It's that English has been uniquely hospitable to change and borrowing. English absorbs words from any language it contacts. It simplifies grammar that gets in the way. It adapts to new contexts and uses. It's a linguistic hybrid: Germanic structure, Romance vocabulary, bits of hundreds of other languages mixed in. This flexibility is English's strength. It can express anything, in any register, drawing from its enormous vocabulary. A formal academic paper uses Latin-Greek words. A casual conversation uses Germanic words. A refined description uses French words, all in the same language. The insane spelling makes sense when you know it's a historical record. Night preserves medieval pronunciation. Det shows Latin origin. Through reflects the great vowel shift. English isn't one language, it's three languages in a trench coat. Germanic grammar from the Anglo-Saxons, French sophistication from the Norman conquest, Latin learning from the Renaissance, all pretending to be one coherent system. And somehow, it works. English succeeded partly through accident of history. Britain built an empire. America became a superpower. English happened to be there at the right moments. But English also succeeded because it's adaptable. It welcomes new words. It tolerates variation. It evolves quickly. It doesn't resist change. It embraces it. Today, English is nobody's language and everybody's language. It's the native language of 400 million people and the second language of over 1 billion more. It's the language of international business, aviation, science, and the internet. But it's also fragmenting into world Englishes, distinct varieties with their own rules, vocabulary, and legitimacy. The English of Shakespeare is not the English of text messages. The English of BBC newsreaders is not the English of Singapore or Nigeria. The English of the past is not the English of the future. And that's okay. That's what languages do. They change, evolve, split, merge, and adapt. English will continue changing. In 500 years, it might be unrecognizable to us, just as Old English is unrecognizable now. But for now, English connects the world. It's the language you're hearing right now, evolved over centuries from a Germanic tribal dialect into a global phenomenon. The complete history of English, from muddy tribal camps in Northern Europe to every corner of the globe, from 50,000 speakers to 1.5 billion users, from a purely oral language to the dominant language of the internet. It's a story of conquest and survival, of borrowing and adaptation, of standardization and variation, of resistance and acceptance. English isn't special because it's superior. It's special because it's supremely flexible. It bends without breaking. It absorbs without rejecting. It changes without losing itself. The next time someone complains about incorrect English, remember, English has always been messy, hybrid, and changing. That's not a bug. It's a feature. That's why it thrived. The next time you struggle with spelling, remember, you're seeing history. Every silent letter, every weird vowel, every inconsistency has a reason buried in the past. The next time you hear an unfamiliar accent or dialect, remember, there's no one correct English. All varieties are legitimate. The language belongs to everyone who speaks it. English came from nowhere, survived against impossible odds, absorbed everything in its path, and became the world's language. And it's still evolving right now as you hear these words. That's the complete history of English, a language that refuses to stand still. Thanks for joining me on this journey through 1,600 years of linguistic evolution, from Anglo-Saxon invasion to internet slang, from Beowulf to emoji, from a small island language to a global phenomenon. English is your language. Whether you're a native speaker or learned it as a second language, whether you speak British, American, Indian, or any other variety, you're part of the ongoing story of English, adding your words, your pronunciations, your innovations to the ever-changing stream. Every time you use a new word, you're participating in the same process that created English from Germanic dialects, absorbed French vocabulary, standardized through printing, spread through empire, and adapted to the internet. English isn't finished. It will keep changing, as it always has, shaped by technology, culture, and the billions of people who use it. The history of English is still being written, and you're part of writing it.